Hey guys, my name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be filming my April wrap-up. And in the month of April, I was able to read 15 books, which is one of my higher read months. I was also able to read 6,025 pages this month, which is like the most pages I think I've ever read in a month ever, because I did have 3 books this month that were over 500 pages. I had a 500 page book, a nearly 700 page book, and then an 850 page book. Quite a lot of reading done this month. I'm very happy with it. And the best news is that I had 3 5-star books this month, 7 4-star books this month, and 5 3-star books this month. I didn't have any 2-star books. I didn't have any 1-star books, and I think that that's a first for me. I pretty much enjoyed almost every single book that I read. Some of them were disappointing, sure, but most of them I really enjoyed, and like that's so exciting to me. I did, granted, have a lot of reading time this month because I was quarantined at home for the entire month of April. I also did 2 of my own like reading challenges for myself this month. I read my favorite booktuber Kayla's favorite books earlier this month, and so I'll link that reading vlog down below if you missed it. And then I also did like a fun reading challenge for myself to read 3 hyped horror novels. So that was the other reading challenge I did for myself this month, and I'll link that down below. I also did another Stephen King reading vlog that was very successful, and it's one of my new favorite Stephen King books. And then as far as genres go that I was reading this month, I was all over the place. I had 1 thriller, 1 historical fiction sci-fi, 2 contemporary novels, 4 horror novels, 1 literary fiction, 2 romances, 1 fantasy sci-fi, and 3 memoirs / nonfiction books. And then for male versus female authors, I had 5 male authors and 10 female authors. So let's just jump into what I read this month. I'm so excited for this wrap up because I've loved so many of these books. First one that I read this month is The Guest List by Lucy Foley, and this was one of my book of the month selections for the month of April, and this was a 5-star thriller for me. I can't even remember the last time that I gave a thriller 5 stars, but this thriller was just everything. This one takes place on an island in Ireland, and it takes place during a wedding, and this is like a classic whodunit story because somebody in the wedding party gets murdered. We don't know who at the beginning of this book, but throughout the book we finally start to figure out who got killed, and then we try to figure out who killed them because everybody in the wedding party has a motive to kill this person. I love the creepy, spooky island vibes of this book. It just really was exactly the kind of thing that I love in a thriller. And I thought the writing was so great. We follow 6 different points of view in this book because we follow a bunch of different characters in the wedding party. Once you're in it, it is so easy to tell the difference between all the points of views, and I just really enjoyed every single character's perspective, and it was so good. It's like one of my new favorite thrillers. Highly recommend. The second book that I read this month is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Woo! So glad I finally got around to this massive book. This is the longest book I read this month. This one is like 850 pages, and I did an entire reading vlog dedicated to this book, so I'll link that down below if you missed it. This book was incredible. This is a historical fiction sci-fi kind of book, so it's definitely different from any other thing that I've read from Stephen King. And in this book, our main character Jake is a high school teacher, and he has this friend who owns this diner, and the friend tells him that he has this time portal that's in his diner, and he's been attempting to go back into the past and prevent the assassination of JFK. And so in this book, our main character Jake goes back to the year 1958, and this book is just incredible. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and yes, I cried like a bitch at the end of this book. You can see that in my vlog, but it was just so good. Like, I couldn't even control my emotions. The next book I read was the first book that I did for the Reading Kayla's Favorites video, and I read Michigan versus the Boys by Carrie S. Allen, and this one is a hard-hitting young adult contemporary novel. It's about this girl who is a hockey player, and her hockey team gets cut at her local high school because of budget cuts, and so she says she wants to play for the boys team, and she goes and tries out and makes it onto the boys team. But then this character, Michigan, deals with a lot of abuse, like physically and verbally, from the boys on the team because they don't want a girl on their team. And this book is just very heavy. This book was okay, it just wasn't really for me, I think, but I do think that it's an important topic that should be read by a lot of young adults. And so I had some trouble rating this one because I do think that the content in this book is worthy of 5 stars, but I just personally didn't connect with these characters in the way that I was hoping to. And there's a lot of insta-love kind of scenes with our main character in this book, so I just like wasn't really here for that. But I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Like, it was okay. The next book I read for that video was Bunny by Mona Awad, and this is definitely my favorite thing that I read for the Reading Kayla's Favorites video that I did, because this book is a horror novel and it is literally the strangest book that I have ever read in my whole freaking life, but I loved it so much. Like, it was so weird and it was so good. And this book is kind of hard to explain like what it's even about, but it basically follows this girl named Samantha who's going to college and she's living with her best friend, and there are these 4 girls who are a part of this group that all call each other Bunny, and they're very strange and very weird, and they do some very weird cultish things in their little group clique, and Samantha kind of gets brought into their antics. And I don't really know how to describe this book without spoiling you, so just trust me that it's weird, but it's great. Like, I love the writing in this so much, and the horror part of this book is truly horrifying. I feel like I'm gonna be scarred by this book in the same way that I was scarred by the movie Sorry to Bother You. And I've been hearing this book being described as Mean Girls but written by Stephen King on acid, and I was like, yes, that is exactly what this book is. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. It wasn't a perfect book for me, but I loved it so much. The last book that I read for that video was Middle Game by Shawnee Maguire, and this book really surprised me. I wasn't sure if this was going to be something that I would enjoy or not, because this one's like a fantasy sci-fi, so it's definitely something that's out of my comfort zone. I love the characters Roger and Dodger so much. They're these siblings that were created in a lab by this guy. They were created with the intention of being able to like control the world. Their relationship is just so soft, and I really loved all the portions of this book that felt more like a contemporary story about Roger and Dodger and just getting to see more about their lives. So that was definitely the most interesting part of this book to me, and I think this book definitely lost me going into the end of it because it was just getting really confusing and nothing was explained about anything. They just keep talking about this impossible city and it just didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. I ended up giving this one like a 3.5 out of 5, but I still was really impressed with how much I connected with these characters and how much I loved it for that reason. The next book I read shortly after that video was My Dark Vanessa. I listened to the audiobook for this one because I got it checked out from my library. This one is a literary fiction novel that has a student-teacher relationship at the center of it, which is mainly why I was interested in reading it. Like, not gonna lie, I just really love books that deal with these kind of weird relationships like this. This book was good, like, I will give it that. It's written very well, it is very emotionally moving and effective, and I really felt for these main characters. But I do feel like this book was just too long. Like, it was so many hours for an audiobook and it just kind of got like repetitive in a way. But the thing that was really interesting about this book is that it's kind of going back and forth between a few different timelines. So like, we do get to see the chapters of like while Vanessa's in high school in this relationship, but then we also get to see chapters from like the years that she's in college, and then like later on in her life after something happens with this teacher again. And it's kind of interesting the way that the story is told. It's like going back and forth, and I don't know, I really enjoyed it. I just don't think I loved it the way that I wanted to, so I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. Like, it was good. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend it though. The next book I read was Beach Read by Emily Henry, and this was another selection for the month of April for Book of the Month, and this one's probably got to be like my biggest disappointment of the year so far. Not that I didn't like this book, but this was literally like my most anticipated 5-star predictions. Like, I thought this book was gonna be the next Unhoneymooners for me. Like, I thought I was gonna absolutely love it, and I just left this book with feelings of like meh. Like, it was okay for me, and I know I'm definitely in the minority here of thinking that this book was just okay because everybody else seems to absolutely love this, and I just have this fear that I went into this book with way too high of expectations. But this is a romance that follows 2 writers. We have Augustus Everett and January Andrews. She's a romance writer and he writes literary fiction, and they're both in a writer's block, so they're in like neighboring lake houses over the summer, so they decide to swap genres for the summer. And this is basically the perfect like dream premise for me. Like this sounds like everything I would want in a book. I didn't really like Gus. I don't know, he just came off as like so pretentious sometimes. He was so like playing games with her still so far into this book that it just really like rubbed me the wrong way. Like he was just really obnoxious, I feel like. I started off really enjoying this book. Like for the first 100 pages, I thought their banter was like so on point, and I thought that this was gonna be a new favorite. But this book has like a bunch of different moods too. Like they make it sound like it's gonna be this light like beach read, and then there's like some really dark and like weird shit in this book. These scenes of Gus wanting her to do some research for her literary fiction novels, so they go and like visit these cults, and it's like these people who like their siblings committed suicide, and it's just like sad and depressing. And so like the mood of this book would constantly shift from this like light-hearted banter to like serious shit, and it was just kind of weird. Like the tone of it was just all over the place. I don't know, this was a 3-star book for me. Definitely my biggest disappointment of the year, even though it wasn't a bad book. It just wasn't what I was hoping it would be. Alright, the next 3 books that I read this month were the 3 horror novels that I read for my Reading Hyped Horror Novels video. The first one I read was The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This was my first Grady Hendrix novel, which I'm very excited about because I know he's a really loved horror author. This one is this adult horror novel that's about this book club of moms that are in the South. Then this dude that's a vampire stumbles upon their book club, and then it's about how he's kind of like inserting himself into their lives and how they're kind of like catching on to the fact that he might be a vampire. And it's just a whole lot of fun. I love the 90s vibes of this book because it takes place in the 90s. Some of this book was truly kind of terrifying. Like there are definitely some scenes from this book that are gonna stick into my brain forever. I don't know, I had a lot of fun with this book. Like I don't typically read anything that involves vampires, so this was definitely kind of like out of my comfort zone in that sense, but I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun, and I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was great. The next book I read for that video is The Troop by Nick Cutter, and this has been the biggest surprise of the year for me so far. This was a 5-star book for me. I absolutely loved it, but this book is absolutely terrifying. Like this is like legit my biggest fear come to life in a book, which is exactly what I was looking for, I guess, while I was filming that video. But this book is about all of these boys in the Canadian wilderness. They're on this island and they're all a bunch of scouts. It's kind of like Lord of the Flies in that way, I guess. And then while they're on this island, this man comes to the island on this boat, and he is ridiculously thin and so scrawny and so hungry, and he's literally like shoveling soil dirt into his mouth while he's approaching them, and he's just asking them to please feed him. And they know that something's off about this guy, they don't know what. Holy crap, this book is terrifying. If you've ever had a fear of like something being under your skin or like tapeworms in your stomach, then like, oh my god, is this the horror novel for you? Because this shit was so creepy. It reminded me a lot of the movie Annihilation. It reminded me a lot of the movie Alien. My gag reflex was triggered so much while I was reading this because every other scene I was like, huh, but like in the best way. Like this is exactly what I want in a horror novel. Like I want to be terrified. But I will say that I don't know if right now during a global pandemic is the best time to read this book, because some of the things happening were just like mirroring things that were happening right now in our world, and I was like getting even more scared because of it. So this was a 5-star book. I loved it so much. This is definitely my new favorite horror novel that I've ever read, and I can't wait to read more from this author. Holy crap. And then the last book that I read for that video is Nosferatu by Joe Hill. I did not realize that Joe Hill is Stephen King's son, and now I feel stupid. I read this book, it's nearly 700 pages, and it's mainly about this character Charlie Manx, who is this supernatural person. He takes children into his car with this license plate, and he plays Christmas music, and he takes them to Christmas Land, and he thinks that he's saving them from abusive households. I don't know, this book was really interesting. I think the premise of this book sounded a lot more interesting than the actual execution of the book did for me. But I will say that Charles Manx is a really well-written villain. Like he's very creepy, and it was very convincing, and there were some really great scenes with his character in this book. But I do feel like this book is just way too long for what it is. This book between like pages 200 and 600, I was like bored out of my mind. I don't know, I seem to be in the minority of thinking that this book was just okay. I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. Sorry, the lighting was getting kind of weird there, so I had to move spots a little bit. But the next book that I read was Dancing at the Pity Party by Tyler Fetter, and this is the first book that I read during my 24-hour reading vlog that I did for Dewey's. And this one is a graphic novel, and it is a memoir. This author, her mom died during her freshman year of college, and so it's kind of about her experience with her mom dying from cancer, and it is so freaking sad. I cried so much while I was reading this because losing one of my parents to cancer is literally one of my biggest fears, and this book just freaking destroyed me. But it was also so beautiful, and at the end of the day it was a really hopeful book, which I appreciated. And I've never read a graphic novel that's like a memoir before, so it was just really beautiful, and the images in this book were so bright and beautiful, and it just like made my heart so happy. So I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read was Big Summer by Jennifer Weiner, which huge thank you to Atria Books for the arc of this, and to Booksparks for sending me this hardcover copy. And this book, I was dying to read this because I absolutely loved Miss Everything by Jennifer Weiner last year. It ended up being one of my favorites of the year. And this book was a complete surprise. It was very different from Miss Everything, but I really enjoyed it. And in this book, we're following this girl, Daphne, who is a plus-size Instagram influencer, which, like, yes. She had this childhood best friend named Drew, who is kind of a total asshole. She's kind of like Regina George, where she just kind of like manipulates you and gaslights you and wants to use you for her benefit. They had this really big falling out when they were in college because they got into this really huge fight, and they haven't spoken in 6 years. And then this story picks up 6 years after that fight, and Drew comes to her and asks her to be a bridesmaid in her wedding because she doesn't really have any other friends. And Daphne says yes. And then this is kind of about how she's gonna be the bridesmaid in her wedding. And this book was such a wild ride. I really, really love reading books about toxic, complicated female friendships because I just find them so interesting, and because I've definitely had a few of my own in my life. So I just thought their relationship was so interesting to read about. And this book, like, what the heck, man? At the end of part 1, there was this like unexpected plot twist, and then this story just went to places that I was not thinking it was gonna go, and I was like, what am I reading? What? So this was definitely very surprising, not what I was expecting at all, and I ended up giving this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was good. The ending kind of lost me a little bit. I am gonna say the ending got a little bit too Lifetime drama for me. The next book I finished was an audiobook, and it was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. And this one is this really powerful memoir, and it is about this author's experience of being in a same-sex relationship and experiencing abuse. This is something that I've never read about before in nonfiction, and I think that that's why this book is especially important, because it's bringing up issues like abuse in same-sex relationships, and I just never see that topic brought up in fiction or nonfiction really. But this memoir was just really good. It was so touching and so moving, and the author's way with words in this book is freaking amazing. Like, the writing is so good, and I was invested for this entire audiobook. Like, I was just listening to it while I was going on walks and stuff during this month, and I ended up giving that one 4 out of 5 stars. And then the next one was also an audiobook that I listened to. It is The Happy Ever After Playlist by Abby Jimenez, and this one I was able to listen to because Libro FM allowed me to have early access to some of their titles, which I'm like, thank you, because I love Libro FM because it supports your local indie bookstores, and they're just great. This one is a romance novel that is in the same universe as this author's first book, The Friend Zone, and I was kind of hesitant to read this book after really not enjoying The Friend Zone, but this book was cute. It ended up being just okay for me, to be honest. I really enjoyed the beginning of this romance, and I thought it was cute at the beginning, but I quickly kind of got irritated with some of the things happening in this book because the love interest, Jason, in this book is a rock star, and he's like a huge famous musician, and it just kind of like the drama around his life and his profession just kind of got old for me really quickly. I don't know, I did enjoy this one more than The Friend Zone, but it was still just like an okay read for me. I ended up giving it like 3 out of 5 stars. And then the last book that I read this month was Notes on a Nervous Planet by Matt Haig. The main thing that this book talks about is how can we live in a mad world without ourselves going mad. And I think that this was literally the perfect book to read during this time because the world is such a scary, crazy place right now. And this book kind of talks about how you deal with your anxiety and depression during a crazy time in the world. And my favorite quote from this book is, "The future isn't real. The future is abstract. The now is all we know. One now after another now. The now is where we must live. There are billions of different versions of an older you. There is one version of the present you. Focus on that." And I feel like I just related to this so much because I feel like I get so hung up on like all of these future plans and future things, and I always forget to just live in the present. And I feel like he just touched on a lot of things that I think about often, and he just makes me feel so understood and normal with my anxiety and everything. So I really love this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I just love Matt Haig's writing, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. I just connect to his writing so much, and I just really love and adore this book, and I think it's the perfect time to read this book if you haven't yet. So those are all the books that I read in the month of April. It was a very, very great reading month, probably the best I've had in I don't even know how long. I've never had a month where I've read so much and enjoyed so much of it. It's just crazy. But anyways, my camera is gonna die, so I have to go. Let me know how many books you read in April. What was the best book you read in the month of April? Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye. Hey guys. And so in this book, oh my gosh, I'm a mess today.